The Lamborghini's engine roared to silence in the dusty garage. Leonard Voss stepped out, designer shoes crunching on gravel, eyes scanning the cramped workspace with unveiled disgust. He picked up a sketch from the workbench, complex suspension diagrams, revolutionary brake designs, and laughed. Fantasy drawings from a nobody mechanic. 12-year-old Mira watched her father's face harden, his jaw clench. Evan Brooks said nothing, but something ancient and furious stirred in his chest. This humiliation would either destroy him or resurrect everything he'd buried. Want to see what happens when brilliance meets brutality? Stay until the end and comment your city below. Let's see how far this story travels. The California sun beat mercilessly through the skeletal frame of the garage's corrugated roof, casting prison bar shadows across oil-stained concrete. Evan Brooks wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his grease-blackened hand, leaving another dark smear to join the constellation already mapping his exhaustion. The ancient Chevy before him groaned as he torqued the final bolt on its transmission. Mrs. Chen's car, the third repair this week that would barely cover groceries. "Dad! Mrs. Patterson called again about her Buick." Mira's voice rang from the small office attached to the garage, bright and clear as wind chimes. At 12 years old, his daughter possessed the kind of relentless optimism that both sustained and devastated Evan daily. She emerged holding a pink phone decorated with star stickers, her dark curls pulled into a ponytail, wearing an oversized MIT t-shirt he'd bought her 3 birthdays ago when dreams still seemed possible. "Tell her Thursday," Evan called back, crawling out from under the Chevy. His knees popped. He was only 37 but felt decades older. "And remind her about the estimate I gave her. No surprises this time." Mira nodded seriously, already dialing. She'd become his unofficial secretary over the past 2 years, managing appointments between homework and her obsessive sketching of mechanical designs that made Evan's heart ache with pride and regret. She was brilliant, genuinely brilliant, and trapped in this dying garage in Riverside because her father had become a ghost of what he'd once been. The Brooks Automotive Solutions sign hanging askew outside was a relic from better times, back when Evan had been a rising star at Quantum Motors, leading a team developing revolutionary safety systems, back when Sarah had been alive, when their modest home in Pasadena had rung with laughter, when the future stretched endless and golden before them, before the accident, before the lawsuit that Quantum Motors buried under an avalanche of corporate lawyers, before Evan discovered that the airbag defect that killed his wife had been documented, known, and deliberately suppressed because a recall would cost more than the projected wrongful death settlements. Before he'd walked away from everything, his career, his reputation, his fury, to raise Mira in this borrowed garage in a town where nobody knew his name or cared about his past. "Dad?" Mira appeared beside him, holding out a bottle of water beaded with condensation. "You forgot to eat lunch again." "I'll grab something later, Butterfly." He took the water, drank deeply. The nickname came from her childhood fascination with metamorphosis, how something small and earthbound could transform into something that defied gravity. "You always say that." She crossed her arms, a miniature version of Sarah's lecture stance. "And you're working on the Yamamoto drawings again." Her eyes flicked to the workbench where Evan's latest sketches lay scattered. Advanced suspension concepts, revolutionary brake cooling systems, adaptive safety mechanisms that could predict collision patterns before they occurred. "Just thinking," Evan said softly. "Keeps my mind sharp." "They're brilliant, you know." Mira picked up one of the drawings, her young eyes tracking the technical annotations with surprising comprehension. She'd inherited his engineering instincts. "Why don't you do something with them? Send them somewhere? Show someone?" "Show who, Butterfly?" "I fix cars now, that's enough." "But you could—" The roar of an engine cut her off. Not the tired wheeze of Riverside's usual vehicles, but a sound like liquid thunder, precision, and power compressed into mechanical poetry. Father and daughter turned toward the open garage bay as a Lamborghini Aventador, pearl white with carbon fiber accents, prowled into view like a predatory cat entering a henhouse. Evan's hand stilled on his wrench. Vehicles like this didn't appear in Riverside. This was a town of aging Hondas and tired pickup trucks, of people making do and getting by. The Lambo was worth more than every car in a 3-block radius combined. The engine died. The scissor door rose with hydraulic grace. A man emerged, and Evan understood immediately why the car had come here. This wasn't a client. This was judgment arriving in Italian leather shoes. Leonard Voss stood roughly 6 feet tall, perfectly groomed silver hair swept back from a face that had never known genuine hardship. His suit probably cost more than Evan's monthly rent. He was in his early 50s, radiating the kind of casual arrogance that comes from never hearing the word no without the financial power to reverse it. Evan recognized the type instantly. He'd worked for men like this at Quantum, men who treated engineers as expendable assets and innovation as intellectual property to be exploited. "This the place?" Voss called over his shoulder. A younger man emerged from the passenger side, clipboard in hand, looking around the garage with barely concealed distaste. "According to the GPS, Mr. Voss." "Christ," Voss's lips curled. "I thought Martin was joking." Evan stepped forward, wiping his hands on a rag. Professional courtesy warred with instinctive wariness. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Voss's eyes swept over Evan, taking in the oil-stained coveralls, the second-hand work boots, the garage's shabby interior with its ancient tools and cracked concrete floor. The assessment took perhaps 3 seconds, and Evan felt himself categorized, dismissed, and forgotten in that brief span. Martin Chen recommended this place. Voss's tone suggested his friend had personally betrayed him. "Said you do good work, though clearly Martin's standards have dropped considerably since he moved to this godforsaken town." Mira's hand found Evan's arm. He could feel her tension, her instinctive recognition of threat. 12 years old and already learning to read the cruelty in men's voices. "I do my best," Evan said evenly. "What seems to be the problem?" "The problem," Voss said, walking deeper into the garage without invitation, "is that my Lamborghini developed a concerning vibration at high speeds. My usual mechanic in Beverly Hills is booked for 3 weeks, and I'm driving to Vegas tomorrow for a conference. Martin insisted you could handle it, though looking at this setup," he gestured dismissively at the garage, "I'm having serious doubts. I'd be happy to take a look." "I'm sure you would." Voss's smile was surgical. "Though I wonder if you've ever worked on anything manufactured in this century. Most of your clients seem to drive vehicles that predate the internet." The younger man, an assistant, Evan assumed, actually laughed at this. Mira's grip on his arm tightened. "Mr. Voss, if you'd prefer to, No. Voss waved a hand. "I'm here. Might as well let the local talent have a swing. Just try not to break anything expensive. The Aventador's worth about..." He paused, making a show of calculation. "Well, probably more than you'll earn in the next 5 years, so careful hands, yes?" Evan's jaw tightened. He'd faced this before, the casual contempt of men who measured worth in dollar signs and judged competence by zip code. But usually, Mira wasn't watching. Usually, he could swallow the humiliation without her seeing how deeply it cut. "I understand," he said quietly. "Keys?" Voss tossed them carelessly. Evan caught them one-handed, muscle memory from years of precision work overriding his anger. "Dad's one of the best mechanics in California," Mira said suddenly, her voice high and fierce. "People come from all over because he fixes things other mechanics can't." Voss's attention swiveled to her for the first time, eyebrows raised in amused surprise. "Is that so? And you are?" "His daughter, Mira." "Well, Mira." Voss's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure your father is very competent at what he does. Every town needs someone to keep the old junkers running. It's honest work." The words dripped with condescension. Nothing wrong with honest work. Evan felt something crack inside his chest. Not breaking, but shifting, like tectonic plates grinding before an earthquake. He'd endured the aftermath of Sarah's death, the collapse of his career, the years of rebuilding in obscurity. He'd swallowed pride and accepted his reduced circumstances. But watching this man speak to his daughter with such dismissive cruelty ignited something Evan thought he'd buried forever. "I'll get started," he said, voice carefully neutral. "Mira, why don't you work on your homework inside?" "But Dad..." "Inside, Butterfly." She went, but not before shooting Voss a look of pure 12-year-old loathing that would have been funny under different circumstances. Voss wandered deeper into the garage while Evan moved the Lamborghini onto the lift. The assistant hovered near the entrance, scrolling through his phone. Evan tried to focus on the vehicle, and it was magnificent, a masterpiece of engineering that made his fingers ache with appreciation, even as his heart burned with humiliation. He'd once designed systems for cars like this, had contributed innovations that luxury manufacturers used without credit. Now he was the mechanic they mocked. "What's all this?" Voss's voice carried from the workbench. Evan's heart sank. "These your fantasy drawings?" Evan turned to see Voss holding one of his sketches, a detailed technical drawing of an adaptive suspension system that could read road conditions in real time and adjust shock absorption for optimal safety and performance. It represented months of evening work, of calculations performed after Mira went to sleep, of a mind that refused to stop solving problems even when there was no one left to appreciate the solutions. "Just ideas," Evan said, walking over. "Nothing important." "Nothing important," Voss laughed, a genuine belly laugh of such pure condescension that Evan felt his hands curl into fists. "Oh, this is priceless. Marcus, come look at this." The assistant approached, glancing at the sketch. "What is it?" "Our mechanic friend here has been designing cars in his spare time." Voss held up the drawing like evidence in a trial. "Look at these calculations. My God, you've even got performance projections. What is this? Suspension components? Brake systems?" "Integrated safety architecture," Evan said quietly. "It's a concept for a concept." Voss's laughter intensified. "Did you hear that, Marcus? A concept. From a mechanic in Riverside who fixes Mrs. Chen's transmission. No offense, friend, but do you have any idea what goes into actual automotive engineering? We're talking teams of PhDs with decades of experience, computer modeling systems that cost millions, testing facilities, regulatory compliance." "I understand the process," Evan interrupted, his voice dangerously soft. "I used to what? Watch YouTube videos? Read automotive magazines?" Voss was on a roll now, performing for his assistant, drunk on his own superiority. "Let me explain something about the real world, since you seem to be operating under some serious delusions. Men like me? We pay people with actual degrees, actual experience, actual credentials to design vehicles. We don't just wake up one morning and decide to sketch some lines on graph paper and call ourselves engineers." The assistant chuckled dutifully. Evan noticed the office door was slightly ajar. Mira was listening. Of course she was listening. And he was standing here silent and humiliated, proving every doubt she'd ever secretly harbored about why they lived in this garage, why they struggled, why her brilliant father had become a ghost. "These are fantasy drawings from a nobody mechanic," Voss continued, his voice rising with theatrical cruelty. "And you know what the saddest part is? You probably actually believe you've invented something revolutionary. You probably lie awake at night imagining that some CEO is going to walk through that door, see your sketches, and make you a millionaire." He dropped the papers back on the workbench with exaggerated disgust. "Life doesn't work that way, friend. Not for people like you." The garage fell silent except for the drip of the water heater in the corner. Evan stood frozen, every word landing like a physical blow, because some of them were true. He did lie awake imagining vindication, did dream of proving that Sarah's death had meant something, that the innovations he'd developed could save other families from the same tragedy. But hearing those dreams dissected with such casual cruelty, in front of his daughter, in the place where he'd rebuilt some fragile version of dignity. "My dad is smarter than you'll ever be." Mira stood in the office doorway, tears streaming down her face, fists clenched, her entire body shaking with fury and grief. "Mira," Evan started. "No!" She stormed forward, placing herself between Evan and Voss. "You don't know anything about him. He used to work for Quantum Motors. He led the engineering team. He created safety systems that saved lives." Voss's eyebrows rose, genuine interest flickering across his face for the first time. "Quantum Motors? You worked for Quantum?" Evan closed his eyes. He'd never told Mira not to mention his past, but he'd hoped she'd understand the unspoken rules of his exile. "I did," he admitted. 6 years ago. I left." "Left or were fired?" Voss's smile returned, sharper now. Let me guess, you had some disagreement about compensation? Felt undervalued? Thought you deserved more recognition? He laughed. Oh, this explains so much. You're one of those guys, the bitter ex-employee who thinks he was the real genius behind the company's success. Now you're rotting in this garage, sketching revenge fantasies and telling your kid bedtime stories about how talented Daddy used to be. Stop it, Mira shouted. His wife died. My mom died because Quantum knew their airbags were defective and didn't fix them. He left because they were liars and murderers. The words hung in the air, raw and terrible. Evan felt his world tilt. He'd never told Mira the details. She'd been too young when Sarah died, and he'd wanted to protect her from the ugliness of corporate malfeasance, from understanding that her mother's death had been preventable, that profit margins had been valued more than human lives. But she'd figured it out. Of course she had. She was brilliant, and she'd spent 2 years watching her father work himself to exhaustion. In this garage. Had seen the lawsuit papers he'd thought were hidden, had probably Googled the accident report and read every detail he'd tried to spare her. Voss's smile faded slightly. Well, that's unfortunate. But personal tragedy doesn't qualify you to redesign automotive engineering. If anything, it probably clouds your judgment, makes you obsessive about safety at the expense of performance. That's why companies hire professionals, people who can think objectively. Evan found his voice. Get out. Excuse me? Get out of my garage. Take your car somewhere else. Voss laughed, incredulous. Are you serious? You're turning down business because I hurt your feelings? I'm turning down business because I don't work for people who disrespect me or my daughter. Keys. Evan held out his hand. For a moment, Voss looked genuinely surprised, as if the concept of a mechanic in a dying garage refusing his money was incomprehensible. Then his face hardened. You know what? He snatched the keys from Evan's hand. This place was a dump anyway. I'll drive on the vibration. Probably imagined it. He stalked toward the Lamborghini, Marcus scurrying after him. And for your information, friend, those sketches? They're garbage. Pure fantasy. No reputable company would waste 5 minutes on them. But sure, keep dreaming. Maybe someday you'll wake up. The Lamborghini's engine roared to life. Voss powered out of the garage, tires spitting gravel, the sound of expensive machinery fading into the California afternoon. Evan stood in the sudden silence, still shaking with adrenaline and suppressed rage. Mira rushed to him, wrapping her arms around his waist, her face pressed against his stained coveralls. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shouldn't have said anything about Mom. He was so mean. You don't need to apologize, Butterfly. Evan held her tight, his voice rough. Not for defending me. Not for any of this. He called your work garbage. I know. But it's not. It's brilliant. Anyone with eyes could see that. Evan looked at the scattered sketches on his workbench. Years of work, of channeling grief into innovation, of solving problems that had killed Sarah and could kill others. Voss was right about one thing. They were fantasy, not because the designs were flawed, but because Evan had no way to make them real. No company would listen to a disgraced ex-employee working out of a riverside garage. No investor would fund an engineer who'd walked away from the industry. His ideas would die here, unknown and unbuilt. Sometimes brilliant isn't enough, he said quietly. Mira pulled back, looking up at him with Sarah's eyes, dark and fierce and unwilling to accept defeat. Then we make it enough. We find someone who'll listen. We prove he's wrong. Mira, No, Dad. Listen. She grabbed his hands, her grip surprisingly strong. You taught me that good ideas eventually find the right people, that the truth doesn't stay buried forever. You taught me that. Had he? Evan wasn't sure what he'd taught her beyond survival and disappointment, but looking at his daughter's face, seeing her absolute faith in him, he felt something shift again in his chest. Not breaking, but perhaps healing. Perhaps remembering what he'd once been before grief and failure had worn him down. Maybe, he said softly. Maybe you're right. I am right. Mira released him and marched to the workbench, gathering the scattered sketches with careful hands. And I'm going to prove it. Come on. Come on where? The office. You have a computer. I have the internet. And someone, somewhere is going to recognize genius when they see it. Evan watched his daughter disappear into the tiny office, clutching his designs like treasure. He should stop her, should explain that the world didn't work the way she imagined, that professional engineering communities were closed systems that didn't welcome outsiders, that posting his concepts online would likely accomplish nothing except exposing them to more mockery. But he didn't stop her. Because Leonard Voss's cruelty had awakened something Evan thought had died with Sarah, the stubborn, furious refusal to let arrogance win. The belief that his work mattered. The conviction that silence was sometimes more destructive than failure. He followed Mira into the office, where she was already booting up the ancient desktop computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard with determined purpose. "Okay," she said. "There are these engineering forums. I've been reading them for months. MIT's open boards, automotive design communities, even some Tesla fan groups who love discussing modifications. We post your designs there, explain what they do. Let people who actually understand engineering see them." "Mira, these are specialized communities. They're not going to take seriously. A nobody mechanic from Riverside?" She looked at him with devastating clarity. "I know. That's why we don't tell them that part. We just show the work. Let it speak for itself." Evan felt tears prick his eyes. When had his daughter become so brave? When had she developed this warrior's heart? "Okay," he heard himself say. "Okay, Butterfly. Let's try." They worked through the afternoon, Evan explaining the technical aspects of each design while Mira typed furiously, crafting posts that stripped away personal details and focused on the innovations themselves. By sunset, they'd uploaded his adaptive suspension concept, his revolutionary brake cooling system, and his integrated safety architecture to 7 different forums and engineering communities. "Now we wait," Mira said, hitting the final submit button. "And hope," Evan added. "No." She turned to him, her face serious beyond her years. "Not hope. We know, because you're brilliant, Dad. And eventually, the right people are going to see it." That night, after Mira had gone to bed, Evan stood in the garage holding the sketch that Voss had mocked. He studied the lines and calculations he'd poured months into creating, trying to see them objectively. Were they garbage? Fantasy drawings from a nobody mechanic? Or were they something more? He thought about Sarah, about the last time he'd seen her alive, kissing him goodbye before driving to pick up groceries, her laughter as Mira did a cartwheel in the driveway, the ordinary beauty of a Thursday afternoon that had become the last afternoon. He thought about the police report, the lawsuit documents, the moment he'd discovered that her death had been preventable, and he thought about Leonard Voss's words. "You probably lie awake at night imagining that some CEO is going to walk through that door." Yes, he did imagine that. Because the alternative, accepting that Sarah's death was meaningless, that his innovations would die with him, that men like Voss would always win, was unbearable. Evan carefully stored the sketches in a folder, turned off the garage lights, and walked to his small apartment above the shop. Somewhere across the internet, his designs were floating in digital space, waiting to be seen, waiting to be judged, waiting to matter. He didn't sleep that night, but for the first time in 2 years, it wasn't grief that kept him awake. It was something that felt dangerously like hope. 3 days passed like water through cupped hands. Slow enough to feel each hour, fast enough that Evan couldn't quite believe it was Friday morning when Mira burst into the garage waving her phone like a flag of victory. "Dad! Dad, you have to see this!" Evan looked up from the Buick he was working on, transmission fluid coating his forearms. Mrs. Patterson's repair had turned into a nightmare of corroded bolts and stripped threads, the kind of job that ate time and profit in equal measure. "Butterfly, I'm right in the middle of—" "Forget the Buick." She skidded to a stop beside him, breathless, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made his stomach flip. "Your posts are blowing up, like actually blowing up." He wiped his hands on a rag, slowly, buying time to manage expectations. They'd checked the forums obsessively for 2 days. A handful of views, a couple of generic comments, nothing suggesting anyone of importance had noticed. By yesterday, Evan had convinced himself the whole exercise had been therapeutic, but ultimately futile. The world didn't work on merit alone. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. "Show me," he said, keeping his voice carefully neutral. Mira thrust the phone at him. The screen showed one of the engineering forums they'd posted to, but the view counter had exploded. Over 40,000 views on the adaptive suspension post alone. The comment section scrolled endlessly, filled with technical analysis, heated debates, users tagging other engineers and researchers. "Look at this one," Mira said, navigating to a comment near the top. "This guy works at BMW's Munich facility. He's calling your brake cooling system potentially revolutionary. And here," she scrolled frantically, "someone from MIT's mechanical engineering department wants to know who designed this because they've been working on similar concepts for 3 years and haven't solved the heat dissipation problem you figured out." Evan's hands started shaking. He read the comments with growing disbelief. These weren't casual observers or amateur enthusiasts. They were credentialed professionals, people with decades of experience, and they were taking his work seriously, more than seriously. They were dissecting it, stress testing the concepts, identifying applications he hadn't even considered. "There's more," Mira said, her voice dropping to something almost reverent. "Someone shared your integrated safety architecture post to a private forum for automotive executives. Dad, people at Tesla saw it. People at Ferrari." "Ferrari?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Ferrari," Mira confirmed. She pulled up another thread, this one on a more exclusive platform requiring industry credentials to access. Someone had screenshotted the discussion and shared it publicly. Evan recognized several names in the thread. Senior engineers he'd once respected from a distance, people whose textbooks he'd studied in college. And they were talking about his work. Not mocking it, not dismissing it, analyzing it with the kind of serious technical rigor reserved for peer-reviewed research. "Jesus," Evan breathed. "Is it okay?" Mira asked suddenly, anxiety cracking through her excitement. "That I posted them? I didn't think about... are you mad?" He looked at his daughter, this fierce 12-year-old who'd taken his humiliation and transformed it into action, who'd believed in him when he'd barely believed in himself. "Mad? Butterfly, His voice broke. "I'm proud of you. So damn proud." She hugged him, not caring about the transmission fluid, and Evan held her there in the garage while the weight of 2 years began to shift. Not disappearing, Sarah's absence would always be a hollow space in his chest. But maybe, finally, beginning to mean something beyond grief. The phone rang in the office. They both jumped. "Probably Mrs. Chen about her timing belt," Evan said, but his heart was hammering. It rang again. Mira pulled away, looking at him with wide eyes. "Answer it," she whispered. Evan walked to the office on legs that felt disconnected from his body. The ancient landline rattled on the desk. He'd kept it because cell service was spotty in the garage and clients needed reliability. He picked up on the fourth ring. "Brooks Automotive." "Mr. Brooks? Mr. Evan Brooks?" The voice was female, precise, carrying the ghost of a European accent. "Speaking." "My name is Dr. Camilla Santori. I'm the head of advanced innovation at Ferrari SPA, based in Maranello, Italy." A pause. "I apologize for the cold call, but I've spent the last 6 hours analyzing designs I believe you created, and I'd very much like to speak with you about them." The garage tilted. Evan sat down hard in the desk chair, the phone pressed to his ear like a lifeline. "Ferrari," he said stupidly. "Yes. I realize this must seem unusual, but your work appeared on several engineering forums we monitor for emerging talent and disruptive concepts. Your integrated safety architecture specifically, I've had 3 of my senior engineers reviewing the calculations since yesterday afternoon." Another pause. "Mr. Brooks, are you the sole creator of these designs?" "I am." His voice sounded distant, like someone else was speaking through his mouth. "And you're currently working as an independent mechanic in Riverside, California?" "Yes." "May I ask why?" The question wasn't judgmental, just genuinely curious, the way a scientist might ask about an unexpected data point. Evan closed his eyes. "That's a long story, Dr. Santori." "I'm sure it is. Mr. Brooks, I'm going to be direct because my schedule is fairly unforgiving. The concepts you've posted represent solutions to problems Ferrari has been struggling with for over 3 years. Your brake cooling system alone would give us a significant competitive advantage in Formula One applications. Your suspension design could revolutionize how we approach adaptive handling. And your safety architecture, her voice softened slightly, if implemented correctly, could save lives. Many lives. Mira appeared in the doorway, her face a question mark. Evan couldn't speak, could only shake his head in wonder. I'd like to send a team to meet with you, Dr. Santori continued. Today, if possible. Tomorrow, at the latest. We're prepared to discuss consulting arrangements, potential partnerships, whatever structure makes sense. But first, we need to verify the work is authentic and understand the full scope of your capabilities. Would you be amenable to that? You want to send a team to Riverside. Is that a problem? Evan looked around the shabby office. Water-stained ceiling tiles, a filing cabinet held together with duct tape, Mira's homework scattered across the desk beside outdated automotive manuals. This wasn't where careers were born. This was where they came to die. No, he heard himself say. No problem at all. Excellent. I'll have my assistant contact you within the hour to arrange details. In the meantime, Mr. Brooks, please don't share these designs with anyone else. Not yet. If they're as valuable as I believe, we need to discuss intellectual property protections before wider distribution. I understand. And Mr. Brooks? A smile entered her voice. Welcome back to automotive engineering. Something tells me you've been missed. The line went dead. Evan sat frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear, his mind spinning through the impossibility of what had just occurred. Ferrari. Ferrari had called him. The company that defined automotive excellence, that built machines for Formula One circuits and discriminating collectors, that represented the absolute pinnacle of engineering achievement. They'd called him. In his garage. In Riverside. Dad? Mira's voice was small. What happened? He turned to her, and the expression on his face must have been wild because she took an involuntary step back. Ferrari is sending a team to meet with us, he said slowly, testing the words for reality. They want to discuss my designs. Mira's scream of joy probably registered on seismic equipment. She launched herself at him, nearly knocking over the chair, laughing and crying simultaneously. I told you someone would see. You did. Evan held her, his own eyes burning. You absolutely did. The rest of that day passed in a blur of frantic activity. Evan cleaned the garage with obsessive intensity, organized his sketches, tried on 3 different shirts before Mira informed him he looked ridiculous in all of them, and he should just wear his cleanest coveralls because that's who he was. The assistant from Ferrari called at noon. A team of 3 engineers would arrive tomorrow morning at 9, stay for approximately 4 hours, conduct preliminary evaluation and testing of concepts. That night, Evan couldn't sleep. He kept running scenarios in his mind, catastrophizing about everything that could go wrong. They'd realize he was a fraud. They'd find flaws in his calculations. They'd decide the designs looked better on paper than they would in practice. Dr. Santori would call back, apologetic, explaining there'd been a mistake. At 2 a.m, he found Mira in the office, wide awake, sketching modifications to his suspension design. Can't sleep either? He asked. She shook her head. I keep thinking about what that man said, Mr. Voss, about fantasy drawings from a nobody mechanic. Mira, I want to find him. Her voice was fierce. After Ferrari makes you famous, I want to find him and show him he was wrong. Evan sat down beside her, studying the sketch she'd been working on. It was good, genuinely good, showing an intuitive understanding of mechanical stress and load distribution. Butterfly, men like Voss will always exist. People who measure worth in dollars and judge competence by appearance. What we do tomorrow isn't about proving him wrong. Then what's it about? He thought about that for a long moment. It's about proving Sarah's death mattered, that the innovations I developed to prevent other families from going through what we went through actually get built, actually save lives. He touched Mira's hand gently. That's the only revenge that means anything. She nodded, blinking back tears. Mom would be proud of you. She'd be proud of both of us, Evan corrected. You're the one who made this happen. You believed when I'd given up. You never gave up, Mira said softly. You kept designing. You kept solving problems. That's not giving up. Maybe she was right. Maybe survival itself was a form of resistance, a refusal to let grief win completely. Evan had kept his mind sharp, kept his skills honed, kept working even when there was no audience and no recognition. And now, impossibly, that work might actually matter. They went to bed around 3, managing a few hours of restless sleep before dawn broke over Riverside. Evan was showered and dressed by 7, drinking his 4th cup of coffee, when Mira appeared looking equally exhausted and wired. "Ready?" she asked. "Absolutely not," she grinned. "Good. Me neither." At 8:47 a.m., a black Mercedes SUV pulled into the garage lot. Evan watched from the doorway as 3 people emerged. Dr. Santori, immediately recognizable from the photos he'd frantically Googled the night before, accompanied by 2 men in their 40s carrying equipment cases. Dr. Camilla Santori was striking in person, late 50s, silver-streaked dark hair pulled back severely, wearing elegant slacks and a blazer that somehow looked both professional and ready for hands-on work. Her eyes, Evan noticed immediately, were the eyes of someone who'd spent decades evaluating machinery and people with equal precision. "Mr. Brooks?" She extended her hand, her grip firm and warm. "Thank you for accommodating us on such short notice." "Thank you for coming." Evan was acutely aware of the garage's shabbiness, the oil stains on the concrete, the ancient tools hanging on pegboard walls. "I apologize for the accommodations. I wasn't expecting—" "Please." She waved off his concern. Some of Ferrari's most important innovations were developed in workshops that made this look palatial. Genius doesn't require luxury. She gestured to her companions. "This is Marco De Luca, Senior Systems Engineer, and James Chen, Computational Modeling Specialist." They shook hands, both men studying Evan with unconcealed curiosity. He recognized their type immediately. Career engineers, the kind of deep specialist who spoke in equations and thought in forced diagrams. "And who is this?" Dr. Santori asked, noticing Mira hovering behind Evan. "My daughter, Mira." "Ah." Dr. Santori crouched slightly to meet Mira's eyes. "I understand you're the one who posted your father's designs online." Mira nodded, suddenly shy. "That took courage," Dr. Santori said seriously, "and excellent judgment. You may have changed the trajectory of automotive safety innovation. That's not something many 12-year-olds can claim." Mira's face blazed with pride. Evan felt his throat tighten watching them. "Now then." Dr. Santori straightened, all business. "Shall we begin? I'd like to review your complete portfolio of designs, discuss your methodologies, understand the scope of your research. Marco and James will run some preliminary stress tests and computational models to verify your calculations. If everything checks out, and I suspect it will, we'll move to more substantive discussions about next steps." The next 4 hours were among the most intense of Evan's professional life. He walked them through each design, explaining his reasoning, demonstrating the problems he'd identified and the solutions he'd developed. Dr. Santori asked razor-sharp questions that tested the depth of his understanding. Marco challenged his structural assumptions with hypothetical scenarios. James ran his calculations through sophisticated modeling software, looking for flaws or oversights. Evan held his ground. More than that, he thrived. This was the world he'd been exiled from, the world of serious engineers solving serious problems, and being back in it felt like oxygen after years of suffocation. He elaborated on concepts, sketched modifications in real time, engaged with their challenges, and incorporated their insights. "This section here," Marco said, pointing to the adaptive suspension design. "The sensor array for reading road conditions. You've specified a refresh rate of 100 Hz. That's faster than most current systems." "It needs to be," Evan explained. "Standard systems react to changes after they've occurred. I want prediction, not reaction. The sensors need to read conditions far enough ahead that the suspension can adjust before the vehicle encounters the irregularity. That requires faster processing. The computational load would be significant, which is why I've designed a dedicated neural processing unit specifically for this function." Evan pulled out another sketch. "See, it's not running through the main vehicle computer. It's a specialized system focused solely on suspension optimization." James looked up from his laptop. "Jesus, You've essentially designed a purpose-built AI for suspension control. I wouldn't call it AI exactly. I would, James interrupted. This is machine learning architecture. Pattern recognition, predictive modeling, real-time adjustment based on accumulated data. Mr. Brooks, do you understand what you've created here? Evan met his eyes. A system that could have saved my wife's life if it had existed 3 years ago. The garage fell silent. Dr. Santori studied him with new understanding. The accident that killed her, Evan continued, his voice steady despite the pain. Investigation determined the vehicle's suspension failed to compensate for a pothole at highway speed. The resulting loss of control led to the crash. Standard suspension would have managed it if the airbags had deployed correctly. But they didn't, because Quantum Motors knew they were defective and didn't issue a recall. He gestured to his designs. So I spent 2 years designing systems that would have prevented both failures. That's what you're looking at. Every calculation, every innovation, every redundancy built from the ground up to ensure no one else has to bury their wife because a manufacturer cut corners. Marco set down his tablet. James stopped typing. Dr. Santori's expression softened with something that looked like profound respect. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "And I'm sorry the industry failed you and your family so catastrophically. I appreciate that. But I also need you to understand something, Mr. Brooks." She moved closer, her voice intense. "What you've created here transcends personal tragedy. These aren't just grief projects or revenge designs. They represent genuine advances in automotive safety and performance. Your brake cooling system solves thermal management problems we've been struggling with for years. Your suspension design could revolutionize adaptive handling across every vehicle class. And your integrated safety architecture, if properly implemented, could reduce traffic fatalities by as much as 30% according to preliminary models." 30%? Evan's voice cracked. 30%, James confirmed, turning his laptop around to show complex statistical projections. That's conservative. If we account for adoption across all vehicle classes and factor in the machine learning improvements over time, we could be looking at 40, maybe 45% reduction in fatal accidents within a decade of full implementation. The numbers were staggering. Evan had known his systems were good, had believed they were important, but hearing professional confirmation that they could save tens of thousands of lives annually made his knees weak. "We need to test them, Doctor," Santori said, rigorously, in controlled environments with full instrumentation. But based on what I've seen today, I'm prepared to make you an offer. Ferrari wants to fund comprehensive development and testing of your safety architecture, with you as lead consultant. We'll provide facilities, staff, resources, whatever you need. In exchange, we'll have first rights to implementation in our vehicles, with licensing opportunities for other manufacturers after initial deployment. "You're offering me a job." Evan couldn't quite process it. "I'm offering you a chance to change the automotive industry," Dr. Santori corrected. "The job is incidental. What matters is ensuring these innovations don't die in a riverside garage because one man was too proud or too hurt to try again." "I'm not proud," Evan said softly. "I'm terrified." "Good." She smiled. "Terror means you understand the stakes. Now I have one more question, and I need you to answer honestly. Are you willing to present these findings publicly? At a major automotive summit, in front of industry leaders and competitors?" Evan's stomach dropped. "How public?" "The Global Automotive Innovation Summit in Detroit. 2 weeks from now. 1,500 attendees, including executives from every major manufacturer, NASA representatives, NHTSA officials, academic researchers. It's the single largest gathering of automotive minds in the world." She paused. "And it's where reputations are made or destroyed. You want me to present my designs to the entire industry. I want you to prove you're not a nobody mechanic," Dr. Santori said bluntly. "I want you to walk onto that stage and demonstrate that brilliance doesn't require credentials or corner offices, that sometimes the most important innovations come from people the industry has overlooked or discarded. Can you do that?" Evan thought about Leonard Voss's mocking laughter, about Sarah's empty chair at the dinner table, about Mira's fierce belief that truth eventually surfaced, about 2 years of exile and silence and grief that had fermented into something harder than anger, something like purpose. "Yes," he said, "I can do that." Dr. Santori's smile was fierce and approving. "Then let's get to work. You have 2 weeks to refine your presentation and prepare for the most important 4 hours of your professional life. Marco and James will coordinate with you remotely on technical refinements. I'll handle the political aspects, securing your speaking slot, managing expectations, ensuring you have allies in the room when you present." She extended her hand again. "Welcome back to the fight, Mr. Brooks. This time, you're not fighting alone." They shook, and Evan felt something fundamental shift inside him. Not healing exactly, but perhaps the beginning of transformation. The caterpillar didn't become a butterfly through comfort or safety. It became a butterfly by dissolving entirely and rebuilding itself into something capable of flight. After the Ferrari team left, Evan sat in the garage surrounded by his designs while Mira dozed in the office chair, exhausted from the emotional intensity of the day. The afternoon light slanted through the open bay door, painting everything gold. Detroit. 2 weeks. 1,500 people. He should have been terrified. Maybe he was. But underneath the fear was something else. Something that felt like vindication, like Sarah reaching across death to whisper that yes, her loss would mean something, that their daughter would grow up knowing her mother's death had changed the world. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Heard through the grapevine that Ferrari visited you. Impressive. Or lucky. Either way, enjoy your moment. These things rarely last. LV Leonard Voss." Somehow he'd heard about the meeting, and even now couldn't resist diminishing it. Evan stared at the message, waiting for anger to surge. But instead he felt only pity. Voss lived in a world where success was measured in humiliation and worth was determined by wealth. He would never understand what Evan had gained today. Not a job or a contract, but proof that the last 2 years hadn't been wasted, that keeping his mind sharp and his skills honed had mattered. Evan deleted the message without responding. Voss didn't deserve his anger or his attention. What he deserved was to sit in that Detroit auditorium 2 weeks from now and watch a nobody mechanic from Riverside change the automotive industry. That night, after Mira went to bed, Evan stood in the garage holding Sarah's photograph, the one he kept in his toolbox, creased and stained from 2 years of being carried like a talisman. She was laughing in the photo, caught mid-spin at Mira's 6th birthday party, her hair flying wild, her joy so pure it still hurt to see. "I'm going to Detroit," he told her picture softly. "I'm going to stand on that stage and show them what you were worth. What we were worth. What all of this has been for." The photograph didn't answer, but Evan felt something settle in his chest. Permission, maybe, or forgiveness, or simply the knowledge that grief could be transformed into purpose if you were willing to do the work. He carefully returned the photo to his toolbox, turned off the garage lights, and climbed the stairs to his small apartment. Through Mira's bedroom door, he could hear her soft breathing, peaceful and certain. She'd believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. She'd taken his humiliation and turned it into action. Now it was his turn to prove her faith wasn't misplaced. Detroit was waiting. The industry was waiting. And for the first time in 2 years, Evan Brooks felt ready to show them exactly what a nobody mechanic could do when brilliance finally found its audience. The 2 weeks between Ferrari's visit and the Detroit summit compressed into a fever dream of preparation. Evan worked 18-hour days refining his presentation, stress-testing every calculation, anticipating every possible challenge. Dr. Santori called daily from Maranello, her questions surgical and unforgiving, pushing him to justify every design choice, every assumption, every projected outcome. Marco and James sent revisions and suggestions at all hours, their emails arriving with subject lines like critical flaw in thermal model, urgent, or brilliant solution to the sensor array problem. Mira became his assistant, his sounding board, his conscience. She sat through practice presentations in the garage, timing him with the stopwatch function on her phone, interrupting when his explanations became too technical or when he descended into jargon that would lose a general audience. "Dad, you're doing it again," she'd say, pausing mid-presentation. "You just spent 3 minutes explaining harmonic oscillation theory. These are executives, not PhD students. Tell them what it does, not how the math works." "But the math is what makes it credible." "The math is in your backup slides. What makes it credible is you standing there, confident, explaining how this system saved a virtual family in Ferrari's crash simulations. Tell stories, not equations. She was right, of course. Evan had spent so long isolated in technical work that he'd forgotten how to translate engineering into human terms. But Mira understood instinctively. She'd inherited Sarah's gift for communication, for making complex ideas accessible without dumbing them down. They practiced in the mornings before school, in the evenings after Evan finished the day's repair work, late into the night when sleep proved impossible. Evan's presentation evolved from a dry, technical briefing into something more powerful, a narrative about how personal tragedy could fuel innovation, how safety systems weren't abstract concepts, but the difference between families staying intact or being shattered by preventable deaths. Better, Mira said after a late-night run-through, 9 days before Detroit. But you need to own what happened to you. Don't hide from it. Mr. Voss tried to use your past as a weapon. You need to use it as armor. I don't want to exploit your mother's death for sympathy. You're not exploiting it. You're explaining why this matters. She came to stand beside him, looking at the projected slides on the garage wall. Everyone in that room has lost someone, Dad. Everyone understands grief. What they don't understand is how to transform it into something that saves other people. That's what you did. That's the story. Evan looked at his daughter, this wise beyond her years 12-year-old who'd somehow become his guide through impossible waters. When did you get so smart? I learned from the best. She hugged him quickly. Now, go to bed. You need sleep more than you need another practice run. He tried to sleep, but his mind kept spinning through scenarios. What if his presentation failed to land? What if the industry dismissed him as an interesting curiosity but nothing more? What if Leonard Voss was right and this moment of attention was just luck, a fluke that would fade as quickly as it had appeared? Worse, what if he succeeded? What if his innovations were adopted, implemented across manufacturers, and the industry embraced him as the genius doctor? Santori believed he was? Could he handle that kind of visibility after 2 years of invisibility? Could he rebuild a life in the spotlight when he'd barely managed to survive in the shadows? 5 days before Detroit, a package arrived from Ferrari. A custom-tailored suit in charcoal gray, Italian leather shoes, a leather portfolio embossed with his initials. The accompanying note from Dr. Santori read, "Genius deserves proper presentation. See you in Detroit. CS." Evan stared at the suit for a long time. It represented everything he'd walked away from: professional success, industry respect, the trappings of achievement. Putting it on felt like stepping back into a skin he'd shed, and he wasn't sure it would still fit. "Try it on," Mira urged. He did, standing awkwardly in their tiny bathroom while she adjusted the collar and smoothed the shoulders. "You look like Dad again," she said softly. "The Dad from the old photos. The one who worked at Quantum. Is that good?" "It's not good or bad, it's just you. The real you, not the garage version." She met his eyes in the mirror. "You've been hiding, Dad. Maybe it's time to stop." The night before their flight to Detroit, Evan couldn't sleep at all. He lay in bed watching shadows move across the ceiling, his mind cycling through every possible disaster scenario. At 3 a.m., he gave up and went down to the garage, intending to run through his presentation one more time. He found Mira there, sitting at his workbench, reading through the printed version of his slides by lamplight. "Butterfly, what are you doing up?" She looked at him with eyes that seemed too old, too knowing. "I keep thinking about what happens after. When you're famous and everyone wants to work with you. When you're traveling and doing consulting and don't have time for this garage anymore." Evan sat beside her, his heart aching. "Is that what you're worried about? That I'll leave?" "Not leave exactly, just change. Become someone different. Someone who doesn't have time for me." He took her hands, holding them gently. "Mira, listen to me. Whatever happens in Detroit, whatever opportunities come from this, you are my priority. Always. You're the reason I kept working when giving up would have been easier. You're the reason I'm standing on that stage tomorrow. Everything I do so you can have the life your mother and I dreamed for you." "But what if—" "No, what ifs. Here's what I know. I love you more than any career, any recognition, any amount of success. You are not losing me to this. If anything, you're gaining the father you deserve, the one who isn't buried in grief and regret, the one who can actually give you opportunities beyond this garage. Mira's tears came then, hot and fast. I don't want opportunities. I just want my dad. You have me. You've always had me. And tomorrow you're going to watch your dad do something impossible. And then we're coming home, and I'm still going to fix Mrs. Patterson's Buick and burn grilled cheese sandwiches and help you with your homework. The core things don't change, Butterfly. They just get better. She nodded against his shoulder, and they sat there in the quiet garage until dawn began to gray the eastern sky. The flight to Detroit was surreal. Ferrari had booked them first-class tickets, Mira's first time flying, and she pressed her face to the window during takeoff, watching California disappear beneath clouds. Evan tried to review his notes, but found himself instead watching his daughter discover the joy of flight, and something in his chest loosened slightly. Whatever happened next, they'd have this moment, this shared experience of rising above everything that had held them down. Dr. Santori met them at the Detroit airport, accompanied by Marco and James. She'd arranged accommodations at the Renaissance Center, the hotel attached to the convention center where the summit was being held. Their room overlooked the Detroit River, the Canadian shore visible in the distance. Your presentation is tomorrow at 2 p.m., Dr. Santori briefed them in the hotel lobby. Main ballroom, 1,500 capacity, expected to be standing room only. You're following presentations from BMW's autonomous driving division and Tesla's battery innovation team, so the audience will be warmed up and engaged. Standing room only? Evan's stomach lurched. Your designs have generated significant buzz in the 2 weeks since they went public. People want to see the man behind the concepts. They want to know if you're legitimate or just internet hype. She smiled slightly. No pressure. That evening, Ferrari hosted a private dinner for key stakeholders, automotive executives, research directors, a handful of journalists from industry publications. Evan found himself seated between a senior vice president from BMW and a department head from NASA's Vehicle Safety Division, both of whom grilled him politely but intensely about his methodologies. The adaptive suspension concept, the BMW executive said, her German accent precise. You claim it can predict road conditions, but prediction requires data from conditions not yet encountered. How does your system solve the causality problem? Evan launched into an explanation of his sensor array design, the predictive algorithms, the machine learning architecture that allowed the system to build models from accumulated data. She listened intently, occasionally interjecting with technical challenges that Evan fielded with growing confidence. Across the table, he noticed Mira in conversation with Dr. Santori, both of them laughing about something. His daughter looked so small in this room full of industry titans, and yet she held her own, asked intelligent questions, made the adults around her smile with her earnest curiosity. The NASA representative leaned in. Mr. Brooks, I understand you developed these systems following a personal tragedy. May I ask what drives you to continue this work? Beyond the obvious motivation of preventing similar accidents? Evan considered the question carefully. I think I spent 2 years angry at Quantum Motors for suppressing the defect that killed my wife, angry at an industry that prioritizes profit over safety, angry at myself for not seeing the signs, not protecting my family better. He paused, aware that the conversation around them had quieted, that people were listening. But anger is exhausting, and it doesn't build anything, so I channeled it into engineering problems, into solutions. And somewhere in that process, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was hopeful, because every calculation, every design, every innovation represented a family that might stay intact, a child who wouldn't lose a parent, a future where tragedies like mine become increasingly rare. The NASA representative nodded slowly. That's what separates good engineering from great engineering. Good engineering solves technical problems. Great engineering solves human problems. What you've created is decidedly in the latter category. The dinner continued, but Evan felt a shift in how people regarded him. He wasn't just an interesting anomaly anymore. He was being taken seriously as a peer, as someone whose insights carried weight. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. That night, he barely slept again. Mira was out cold in the adjoining room, exhausted from travel and excitement, but Evan stood at the window watching lights reflect off the dark river, rehearsing key phrases, anticipating challenges, trying to quiet the voice in his head that whispered he didn't belong here, that tomorrow would expose him as a fraud. His phone buzzed at 11 p.m. A text from Dr. Santori. Stop overthinking. You're ready. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, you change the industry. At 1:47 a.m., another text arrived, this one from an unknown number. Saw you're presenting tomorrow. Brave of you. Or foolish. Hard to tell which. Break a leg or don't. LV. Leonard Voss. Somehow he'd gotten Evan's number, and even on the eve of the most important presentation of Evan's life, Voss couldn't resist needling him. Evan stared at the message, and for the first time since their confrontation in the garage, he felt genuinely grateful to the man, because Voss's cruelty had been the catalyst for everything that followed. Without that humiliation, Mira might never have posted his designs, Ferrari might never have called. This moment might never have arrived. Evan typed a response. Thank you for the motivation. See you in the audience. He sent it, turned off his phone, and finally managed a few hours of restless sleep. Morning came too quickly. Evan showered, dressed in the Italian suit, spent 20 minutes with Mira reviewing last-minute details over room service breakfast. She wore a navy dress Ferrari had sent her, looking so grown up that Evan felt his throat tighten. You're going to be amazing, she said, adjusting his tie with the seriousness of a general preparing troops for battle. Just remember, tell stories, not equations. Make them feel it, not just understand it. When did you become my presentation coach? When you became too nervous to remember your own advice. She kissed his cheek. I love you, Dad. Mom would be so proud. At 1:30 p.m., Evan stood backstage at the Renaissance Center's Grand Ballroom, listening to the Tesla executive wrap up his presentation on battery innovation. Through a gap in the curtains, he could see the massive room, row after row of seats filled with the industry's most influential minds. A press section bristling with cameras, massive screens flanking the stage displaying the Tesla logo. Dr. Santori appeared beside him. Nervous? Terrified. Good, channel it. Nervous energy keeps you sharp. She handed him a small lapel microphone. Remember, you're not here to convince them you're smart. They already know that. You're here to make them understand why this matters, why you matter. Can you do that? Evan thought about Sarah, about Mira, about 2 years in a riverside garage rebuilding himself from fragments. Yes. Then let's go make history. The Tesla executive finished a solid applause. The moderator, a veteran automotive journalist, took the stage for the transition. Our next presenter represents something unique in this industry, the moderator began. A brilliant engineer who walked away from traditional career paths to pursue innovation on his own terms. His designs have generated unprecedented buzz in online engineering communities, catching the attention of Ferrari, BMW, and NASA. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Evan Brooks, presenting Integrated Safety Architecture, engineering solutions born from personal tragedy. Evan walked onto the stage into a wall of applause. The lights were blinding, the audience a dark mass beyond the stage's edge. He clipped on the microphone, pulled up his first slide, and for one terrible moment his mind went completely blank. Then he saw Mira, sitting in the front row beside Dr. Santori, giving him a thumbs up with such fierce confidence that something inside him clicked into place. He began. 3 years ago, my wife Sarah died in a car accident that should have been survivable. His voice carried clearly through the ballroom, steady despite his racing heart. The investigation revealed 2 critical failures. First, the vehicle's suspension didn't compensate properly for a road irregularity at highway speed, causing loss of control. Second, the airbag system, which was known to be defective, failed to deploy. The manufacturer had documented this defect, but determined that a recall would cost more than projected wrongful death settlements. The ballroom had gone completely silent. My wife was 34 years old. She left behind a 9-year-old daughter and a husband who worked in automotive engineering and should have been able to protect his family from preventable failures. Evan advanced the slide, showing a photo of Sarah laughing at Mira's 6th birthday party. This is what the industry's failure to prioritize safety cost my family. And we're not unique. 38,000 people die annually in traffic accidents in the United States alone. Global numbers approach 1.35 million deaths, Many of these are preventable with better engineering. He could see people leaning forward, the press section raising cameras. I spent 2 years asking myself what engineering solutions could have saved Sarah. What systems could predict and prevent the cascade of failures that killed her? Another slide, his adaptive suspension diagram. This is what I developed: an integrated safety architecture that combines predictive suspension management, redundant safety deployment systems, and real-time risk assessment using machine learning algorithms. For the next 45 minutes, Evan walked them through his innovations. He showed Ferrari's crash simulation data demonstrating 30% reduction in fatal impacts. He presented NASA's preliminary analysis suggesting applications beyond automotive use. He displayed thermal models from BMW's Munich facility, confirming his brake cooling system solved problems their team had struggled with for years. But he didn't just present data. He told stories. He described the moment he'd realized standard suspension systems were fundamentally reactive, always responding to conditions after they occurred rather than anticipating them. He explained how his integrated safety architecture treated vehicle safety as a holistic system rather than a collection of independent components. Traditional approach treats safety features like airbags, crumple zones, and stability control as separate systems, Evan explained, his confidence growing as he hit his rhythm. My architecture integrates them into a unified system that communicates constantly, predicts potential failure cascades, and activates redundancies before primary systems fail. It's not revolutionary technology. It's revolutionary thinking about how existing technologies communicate. The questions started during his presentation, industry leaders interrupting with technical challenges. Evan welcomed them, fielded each one with detailed responses, used challenges as opportunities to demonstrate the depth of his research. "Mr. Brooks," called out a woman from the BMW section. "Your predictive models assume perfect sensor function. What about sensor degradation over time? Calibration drift? Environmental factors that corrupt data?" "Excellent question," Evan responded. "That's addressed in my redundancy architecture. The system uses multiple sensor arrays with different technologies, optical, radar, and physical pressure sensors. They cross-validate constantly. If one array starts showing drift, the others compensate while triggering a maintenance alert. The system degrades gracefully rather than failing catastrophically." A man in the Tesla section stood. "The computational requirements for real-time processing of this much data must be enormous. How do you prevent processing lag that could make predictions arrive too late?" "I designed a dedicated neural processing unit specifically for this function," Evan explained, pulling up the relevant diagram. "It's not running through the main vehicle computer. It's a specialized system focused solely on safety calculations, with priority processing that bypasses normal computational queues. Think of it as a dedicated safety coprocessor." The questions continued, each one allowing Evan to demonstrate that he'd thought through every angle, anticipated every objection, designed solutions for every potential failure point. Then, from the front row, a familiar voice cut through the discussion. "Mr. Brooks, Leonard Voss, Voss Technologies." The man stood, his expression unreadable. "Your presentation is impressive, certainly, but I'm curious about practical implementation. You've been working in a small garage in Riverside for the past 2 years. No major funding, no research team, no access to testing facilities. How do we know these aren't just theoretical exercises that would fail under real-world conditions?" The ballroom went quiet, everyone sensing the edge in Voss's question. Evan looked at the man who'd mocked him, humiliated him, called his life's work fantasy drawings from a nobody mechanic, and he smiled. "Mr. Voss, I appreciate the question." Evan's voice was calm, even warm. "You're right that I've been working independently, without traditional resources. But that's actually been an advantage, not a limitation. I wasn't constrained by corporate politics, quarterly profit demands, or committee decisions. I could focus purely on solving the engineering problems without compromise." He advanced to a new slide, Ferrari's logo alongside NASA's. As for real-world validation, Ferrari has been testing these systems in their development vehicles for the past 2 weeks. Initial results exceed projected performance by approximately 12%. NASA's Vehicle Safety Division has run parallel simulations using their accident reconstruction models. Their analysis suggests implementation across all vehicle classes could reduce traffic fatalities by 30 to 45% within a decade. Evan paused, letting that sink in. But to directly address your concern about my background, yes, I worked in a small garage. I fixed transmissions and changed oil while developing these innovations. And I think that's exactly the perspective the industry needs, because I wasn't designing for performance specs or profit margins. I was designing for the woman who drives her kids to school every morning, for the father working late who just wants to get home safely, for families who shouldn't have to lose someone because engineers prioritized cost efficiency over human life. The ballroom erupted in applause. Evan saw Voss's face flush, saw him sit down abruptly. "If there are no other questions," the moderator began. "One more." A man stood near the back. "Dr. Robert Chen, MIT Mechanical Engineering Department. Mr. Brooks, your work is clearly exceptional. But you mentioned earlier that you left the automotive industry after your wife's death. Can you elaborate on why you left Quantum Motors specifically?" The ballroom tensed. This was the question Evan had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. "I left because I discovered that Quantum Motors had documented the airbag defect that killed my wife 9 months before her accident. They'd conducted internal testing, confirmed the flaw, and decided not to issue a recall because the projected cost exceeded their estimated liability from wrongful death settlements." Evan's voice remained steady, but emotion crept in at the edges. "They made a spreadsheet calculation that my wife's life was worth less than the inconvenience of fixing their mistake. When I confronted them with this information, they offered me a settlement with a non-disclosure agreement. I refused. I walked away from my career because I couldn't continue working in an industry that operated that way." The silence was absolute. "But here's what I learned in 2 years of exile," Evan continued. "The industry isn't fundamentally broken. The people in it aren't evil. But the incentive structures are misaligned. When safety recalls are treated as financial liabilities rather than moral imperatives, companies make terrible decisions. What I'm proposing isn't just new technology. It's a new framework for thinking about safety as a non-negotiable foundation of automotive design, not an expensive add-on that can be compromised when budgets get tight." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "Thank you for your honesty. And for your work." The moderator stepped forward. "I think that's an appropriate place to close. Mr. Brooks, thank you for a truly remarkable presentation. Let's show our appreciation." The applause was thunderous, sustained, people rising to their feet. Evan stood on the stage, momentarily overwhelmed, watching 1,500 industry leaders acknowledge not just his work, but his pain, his perseverance, his refusal to let grief win. He found Mira in the crowd. She was crying, clapping so hard her hands must have hurt, her face blazing with pride and vindication. As Evan walked off stage, he was immediately surrounded. Executives pressing business cards into his hands, journalists requesting interviews, researchers wanting to discuss collaboration. Dr. Santori materialized from the chaos, gripping his arm firmly. "Not now," she told the crowd. "Mr. Brooks needs a moment. We'll arrange proper meetings through Ferrari's coordination team." She guided him to a quiet corridor backstage, where Mira launched herself at him with such force he staggered. "You did it," she sobbed into his suit jacket. "Dad, you were perfect. Did you see their faces? Did you hear them clapping?" "I heard them, Butterfly." Evan held her tight, his own eyes burning. "We did it. Together." Dr. Santori watched them with an expression that might have been maternal pride. "That was one of the finest presentations I've witnessed in 30 years in this industry. You didn't just present engineering solutions, Evan. You reminded everyone in that room why we do this work, why it matters." "What happens now?" Evan asked, still dazed. "Now? Now everything changes." She smiled. "But first, you have about 200 people who want to talk to you. Ready?" Evan looked at Mira, who nodded encouragingly. He thought about Leonard Voss sitting in the front row, forced to watch a nobody mechanic electrify the industry. He thought about Sarah, about whether she could somehow know that her death had sparked innovations that would save thousands of other families. "Ready," he said. And together, they walked back into the chaos of success, into a future that suddenly stretched bright and impossible before them. The rest of that day in Detroit blurred into a dizzying succession of handshakes, elevator pitches, and impromptu meetings in hotel corridors. Evan found himself shuttled between conference rooms where executives from BMW, Tesla, and Toyota competed for his attention, each offering variations on the same theme: come work for us, name your price, help us revolutionize our safety systems. Dr. Santori stayed close, running interference, reminding overeager recruiters that Ferrari had first rights to consultation agreements and that Mr. Brooks wasn't a free agent to be poached in hotel lobbies. By 7 that evening, Evan was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. His mind felt overstuffed with information, commitments, and possibilities that seemed too enormous to process. Mira had fallen asleep in a chair during his last meeting, her head tilted at an angle that would give her a neck ache, and the sight of her there, his fierce defender, finally surrendered to exhaustion, made his chest ache with protective tenderness. Enough, Dr. Santori declared, standing up in the middle of a Toyota executive's pitch about their development facility in Ann Arbor. Mr. Brooks has given you all remarkable access today. Now he needs rest, and frankly, so do I. We'll reconvene tomorrow at Ferrari's hospitality suite to discuss formal proposals. Until then, good evening. She ushered Evan and a groggy Mira out of the conference room, through the lobby, and into the elevator before anyone could protest. Thank you, Evan said as the doors closed. I was about to lose my mind. I know, you get that glazed look when you're overwhelmed. She pressed the button for their floor. Tomorrow will be more structured. Ferrari is hosting a formal negotiation session where interested parties can present written proposals. You'll review them with our legal team, and we'll help you evaluate which opportunities align with your goals. My goals? Evan repeated, the words feeling foreign. 2 weeks ago, his goal had been fixing Mrs. Chen's Chevy without losing money on parts. Now he was supposed to have strategic objectives for reshaping the automotive industry. The elevator opened. Dr. Santori walked them to their room, waiting while Evan fumbled with the key card. Get some sleep, she said. And Evan? What you did today was extraordinary. Not just the presentation, the way you handled yourself afterward. You stayed humble, asked good questions, didn't let anyone pressure you into commitments you weren't ready to make. That's rare, especially for someone who's been outside the industry for years. You should be proud. After she left, Evan got Mira into bed without fully waking her, then stood at the window overlooking the Detroit River, trying to organize his thoughts. His phone had been buzzing constantly. Congratulatory messages, interview requests, LinkedIn invitations from people he'd never heard of. One text stood out, sent 3 hours earlier from an unknown number. I was wrong about you, sincerely wrong. Would appreciate the chance to apologize properly. Leonard Voss. Evan stared at the message for a long time. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to let Voss sit with his humiliation the way Evan had sat with his in that garage. But another part, the part that had transformed grief into innovation rather than bitterness, recognized that vindication wasn't the same as vengeance. He'd proven Voss wrong not by destroying him, but by succeeding despite him. He typed back, "Apology accepted. No meeting necessary. Good luck with your work." He sent it before he could reconsider, then turned off his phone and went to bed. Sleep came easier than expected, deep and dreamless. And when he woke at 6 the next morning to find Mira already awake and ordering room service breakfast, the previous day felt less like a fever dream and more like the beginning of something real and permanent. "Dad, you're trending," Mira announced, showing him her phone. The screen displayed Twitter feeds, LinkedIn posts, automotive blogs, all discussing his presentation. Video clips had been uploaded, most focusing on the moment he'd addressed Leonard Voss's challenge. The comments were overwhelmingly positive, with engineers and safety advocates praising his transparency about Quantum Motors' negligence. "Is that good?" Evan asked, not entirely sure how he felt about sudden visibility. "It's very good. Look at this one. It's from a traffic safety organization. They're calling your integrated safety architecture the most important innovation in automotive safety since the seatbelt." She scrolled enthusiastically. And this article from Motor Trend says Ferrari stock jumped 2% this morning on news of their partnership with you. Evan sat down heavily on the bed. Ferrari stock moved because of me? Because of your work, Mira corrected. Which is the same thing, but also different. You're not just an engineer anymore, Dad. You're proof that innovation can come from anywhere, that the industry's traditional gatekeeping is obsolete. People are excited about that. The formal negotiation session began at 10 a.m. in Ferrari's hospitality suite, a massive conference room that Ferrari had claimed for the duration of the summit. Dr. Santori presided over the meeting with the efficiency of a general directing troops, while Evan sat at the head of a long table flanked by Ferrari's legal counsel and technical advisors. Representatives from 8 major manufacturers took turns presenting proposals, each more ambitious than the last. BMW offered to establish a dedicated safety innovation lab in Munich with Evan as director, annual budget in the 8 figures, staff of 50 engineers. Toyota proposed a joint venture developing his systems for mass-market vehicles, promising implementation across their entire production line within 3 years. Tesla's pitch focused on integration with their autonomous driving platform, arguing that Evan's predictive safety systems were the missing piece in their self-driving architecture. Each presentation came with salary figures that made Evan's head spin. He'd been living on maybe $40,000 a year from the garage, budgeting carefully to keep Mira fed and clothed and the lights on. Now companies were discussing compensation packages in the high 6 figures, stock options, performance bonuses that exceeded his entire lifetime earnings to date. "I need to think about this," Evan said after the last presentation concluded. "These are all incredible opportunities, but I can't make a decision of this magnitude without careful consideration." "Of course," Dr. Santori said smoothly. "We'll give you time to review the written proposals, discuss them with advisors, determine which path aligns best with your vision. But Evan, I do want to say one thing before we adjourn." She stood, commanding the room's attention. "Many of you are treating this as a bidding war for a valuable asset. And yes, Evan's skills and innovations are valuable. But let's not lose sight of what makes his work truly revolutionary. It's not just technical brilliance, it's moral clarity. He didn't develop these systems to advance his career or maximize profit. He developed them because his wife died, and he refused to let that death be meaningless. Any partnership that loses sight of that motivation, that tries to commercialize his work without honoring its origins, will fail, not just contractually, but ethically." The room fell silent. Several executives shifted uncomfortably. "Ferrari is proposing something different," Dr. Santori continued. "We want to fund a research center in Riverside, California, the Evan Brooks Automotive Innovation Center. Evan will serve as director with complete autonomy over research priorities. We'll provide funding, facilities, and staff, but the center will operate independently with a mission focused exclusively on safety innovation for public benefit. Commercial applications will generate revenue, but they'll be licensed broadly rather than held as Ferrari exclusives. We believe this model honors both the work's origin and its potential impact." She turned to Evan. "You'd have the freedom to pursue innovations without corporate pressure, the resources to test and implement them properly, and the institutional support to ensure they actually save lives rather than gathering dust in patent portfolios. You'd also get to stay in Riverside, near the garage where this journey began, with Mira and her school and community. You wouldn't have to uproot your life to continue your work." Evan felt something crack open in his chest. He'd been so focused on evaluating salary figures and equity packages that he hadn't articulated what he actually wanted. But hearing Dr. Santori describe it, he knew immediately she'd understood something the other executives had missed. He didn't want to work for a corporation again, didn't want quarterly reviews and profit expectations and committees deciding which innovations were commercially viable. He wanted to do what he'd been doing in that garage, solving problems that mattered, at his own pace, answerable only to the families his work might protect. "That sounds perfect," he said quietly. "That's exactly what I want." The other executives started talking at once, some protesting, others revising their offers to include similar autonomy. But Dr. Santori raised a hand. "Gentlemen, ladies, I believe Mr. Brooks has made his preference clear. You're welcome to submit revised proposals through our legal team, but please understand that Ferrari isn't just offering money. We're offering partnership that respects the human element of this work." She smiled slightly. Meeting adjourned. Over the next 2 days, while the summit continued around them, Evan worked with Ferrari's legal team to hammer out details. The Innovation Center would be established in a renovated industrial building in Riverside, with construction beginning immediately. Ferrari would provide initial funding of $12 million annually for 5 years, renewable based on research outcomes. Evan would hire his own team, set his own priorities, and retain significant equity in any patents developed. Commercial licensing would be handled through Ferrari's existing channels, but with provisions ensuring broad industry access to safety-critical innovations. "We're basically giving you a blank check to save lives," Marco said during one planning session. "That's not how automotive companies typically operate." "Then maybe it's time the industry learned new ways to operate," Dr. Santori replied. Evan's work proves that the old model, treating safety as a cost center rather than a moral imperative, is both wrong and inefficient. If Ferrari can demonstrate that prioritizing safety actually generates competitive advantage, other manufacturers will follow. "We're not just funding research. We're attempting to shift industry culture." Mira sat in on many of these meetings, asking questions that revealed her rapidly developing understanding of business and engineering. She wanted to know about hiring practices, diversity initiatives, educational partnerships with local schools. Several executives looked surprised that a 12-year-old was participating in high-level strategic discussions, but Dr. Santori treated her contributions seriously. "You're thinking about community impact," Dr. Santori said approvingly after Mira suggested partnering with Riverside Community College to create apprenticeship programs. "That's excellent. The Innovation Center shouldn't just be an isolated research facility. It should be an economic engine for the entire region." On their last evening in Detroit, Evan and Mira walked along the riverfront, watching boats navigate the dark water between American and Canadian shores. The summit was winding down, attendees heading to airports, returning to their ordinary lives. But nothing about Evan's life would be ordinary anymore, and he was still processing what that meant. "You're quiet," Mira observed. "Just thinking?" About? About how fast everything changed. 3 weeks ago, I was fixing Mrs. Patterson's Buick and living paycheck to paycheck. Now I'm directing an innovation center with a $12 million annual budget. It doesn't feel real. "It's real," Mira said firmly, "and you deserve it. You've been brilliant this whole time, Dad. The world just finally noticed. I'm worried I'll mess it up, that I'll hire the wrong people, prioritize the wrong research, waste Ferrari's investment." "You won't. How do you know?" She stopped walking, looking up at him with Sarah's eyes, old beyond her years. "Because you care more about doing it right than doing it successfully. That's what makes you different from guys like Mr. Voss. He measures success in money and status. You measure it in lives saved. As long as you stay focused on that, you can't mess it up." They resumed walking, and Evan felt some of his anxiety ease. She was right. He needed to trust his instincts, remember why this work mattered, not get lost in the logistics and politics of running a research center. His phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Santori. "Just received final revised proposal from Quantum Motors. They're offering to fund rehabilitation of their corporate reputation by partnering with your center and establishing a whistleblower protection program for engineers who identify safety issues. Thought you should know before you head home tomorrow." Evan stared at the message. Quantum Motors, the company that had killed Sarah, buried the evidence, tried to buy his silence. Now they wanted to partner with him, to rehabilitate their image using his tragedy as a redemption narrative. "What is it?" Mira asked, seeing his expression. He showed her the message. She read it, her face hardening. "Are you going to accept?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to tell them to go to hell. They don't get to profit from Mom's death by pretending to care about safety, now. But another part thinks maybe this is exactly the accountability I wanted. If partnering with my center forces them to implement real whistleblower protections, to take safety seriously, to change their culture, maybe that's worth more than holding a grudge." Mira considered this. What would Mom want? The question hit him hard. Sarah had been practical, focused on outcomes rather than grievances. She'd always said the best revenge was living well, building something beautiful from tragedy's ruins. "She'd want whatever saves the most lives," Evan said finally. "Even if it means working with people who failed her." "Then you know what to do." He typed a response to Dr. Santori. "Schedule a meeting with Quantum, But make it clear, I'm not interested in reputation rehabilitation. If they want partnership, they need to demonstrate genuine cultural change, starting with public acknowledgement of their failures and concrete steps toward better safety protocols. No PR spin. Real accountability. He sent it, feeling both righteous and uncertain. Was he being pragmatic or selling out? Was there a meaningful difference between the two? They flew home to California the next morning. As the plane descended into LAX, Evan looked out the window at the sprawling city below, thinking about how different the return felt from the departure. He'd left as a nobody mechanic with unlikely dreams. He was returning as someone the industry would now take seriously, with resources to actually implement his innovations. A car Ferrari had arranged picked them up at the airport, another surreal detail in a series of surreal days. The driver navigated them back to Riverside, and when they pulled up to the garage, Evan felt a complicated mix of emotions. This place had been his refuge and his prison, the space where he'd rebuilt himself and hidden from the world. "It looks smaller," Mira said, echoing his thoughts. "It does," Evan agreed. "But we'll keep it. It's where everything started. It should stay part of the story." Over the following weeks, Evan's life transformed at dizzying speed. Ferrari's construction team descended on a vacant industrial building 3 blocks from the garage, converting it into a state-of-the-art research facility. Evan worked with Dr. Santori to recruit staff. He wanted a mix of experienced engineers and promising young talent, people who'd been overlooked by traditional hiring practices the way he'd been overlooked. The first person he hired was James Chen from Ferrari's Detroit team, offering him the position of senior systems engineer. James accepted immediately, relocating from Italy with his family. Next came Dr. Patricia Nguyen, a materials scientist who'd been stuck in a dead-end position at a defense contractor despite holding 3 patents in composite safety structures. Then Roberto Sanchez, a recent MIT graduate who'd developed innovative crash prediction algorithms but couldn't find industry backing because he lacked connections. "You're building a team of misfits," Dr. Santori observed during one hiring review. "I'm building a team of people who understand what it means to be dismissed," Evan corrected. "People who will work like they have something to prove, because they do." Universities started reaching out, wanting to establish partnerships. Riverside Community College proposed a joint apprenticeship program. UC Riverside wanted to create a dual-degree program in automotive safety engineering. High schools asked about mentorship opportunities for students interested in STEM careers. "You're becoming an institution," Mira said one evening, watching Evan review partnership proposals at the kitchen table. "That's weird. Tell me about it." "But good weird. The kind where you're changing things instead of just talking about changing things." She was right. The Innovation Center was attracting attention not just for the research it would produce, but for what it represented. Proof that the industry's traditional gatekeeping was unnecessary, that talent and dedication mattered more than credentials and connections. 3 months after Detroit, the Evan Brooks Automotive Innovation Center officially opened. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew automotive executives, government officials, local community leaders, and press from around the country. Evan stood at the entrance to the pristine facility, all glass and steel and cutting-edge equipment, feeling overwhelmed by how far he'd come from that dusty garage. Dr. Santori gave the keynote speech, talking about Ferrari's commitment to safety innovation and their pride in partnering with someone who embodied the industry's best values. Local officials spoke about economic revitalization and educational opportunities. Then it was Evan's turn. He stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, and found himself thinking about Sarah, about how she'd never see this moment but was present in every aspect of it. 3 years ago, I lost my wife to a preventable accident, he began, his voice steady. That loss could have destroyed me. Some days it nearly did, but I had a daughter who needed me to keep going, and eventually I realized that the best way to honor Sarah's memory was to ensure other families didn't face the same tragedy. He gestured to the building behind him. This center exists because grief can be transformed into purpose, because personal tragedy can fuel systemic change, and because the automotive industry is finally recognizing that safety isn't an expensive burden, it's our fundamental responsibility. Everything we do here will be guided by one principle. Human life has infinite value, and engineering excellence means protecting that life at every opportunity. The applause was sustained and genuine. After the ceremony, Evan gave tours of the facility, showing off the crash simulation lab, the materials testing wing, the computational modeling stations where James was already running preliminary tests on the next generation of his integrated safety architecture. That evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the excitement had faded, Evan found himself back in the old garage. He'd kept it exactly as it was, a deliberate memorial to where this journey had begun. His workbench still held tools, Mira's old homework assignments still scattered in the office, the same water-stained ceiling tiles overhead. He pulled out Sarah's photograph from the toolbox, studying her laughing face in the dim light. "We did it," he told her softly. "It took 3 years and almost broke me, but we're building something that matters, something that'll save people like you." The photo didn't answer, but Evan felt peace settle over him in a way it hadn't since her death. The grief would always be there, that hollow space in his chest where Sarah used to live, but now it coexisted with purpose, with the knowledge that her loss had sparked innovations that would protect thousands of other families. His phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Santori. "Just received confirmation from NHTSA. They're establishing new federal safety standards based on your integrated architecture principles. Implementation timeline is aggressive. All new vehicles by 2028. Evan, you've changed national policy. Congratulations." Evan read the message 3 times, letting the magnitude sink in. National safety standards. Every new vehicle in America. Millions of cars, millions of families, millions of moments where his systems would work silently in the background to prevent the tragedy that had destroyed his world. Another text arrived, this one from an unknown number. "Saw the news about NHTSA. What you've accomplished is remarkable. I meant what I said about being wrong about you. If you're ever willing to discuss it, I'd value the chance to properly apologize and perhaps support your work. Leonard Voss." Evan considered ignoring it, but found he couldn't. Voss's cruelty had been the catalyst for everything that followed, and maybe that deserved acknowledgement even if it didn't deserve forgiveness. He typed back, "The Innovation Center is always looking for partners committed to genuine safety advancement. If you're interested in contributing rather than controlling, let's schedule a meeting. But be clear, I'm not interested in gestures. Only substantive support for work that saves lives." He sent it, then added one more message. "And for what it's worth, thank you for underestimating me. It gave me the motivation I needed." The response came quickly. "I think we both learned something. I'll contact your office tomorrow. And Evan, your wife would be proud of you." Evan closed his eyes, letting tears come for the first time in months. Sarah would be proud. Of the center, of his resilience, of Mira's fierce brilliance, of everything they'd built from the ruins of her loss. He carefully returned her photo to the toolbox, turned off the garage lights, and walked across the parking lot to the Innovation Center's gleaming entrance. Tomorrow, his team would begin testing the next generation of safety systems. Universities would send students for training. Manufacturers would implement his designs in millions of vehicles. And somewhere, families he'd never meet would arrive home safely because of equations he'd developed in a dusty garage while grieving. The work wasn't finished, would never be finished, really, because safety was an ongoing pursuit, not a final destination. But standing in the lobby of a facility dedicated to protecting human life, surrounded by equipment and expertise that made the impossible suddenly achievable, Evan finally allowed himself to believe something he'd doubted for 3 years. He'd survived. More than survived. He'd transformed suffering into purpose, isolation into community, despair into hope. The garage where Leonard Voss had mocked him now stood as a monument to persistence, a reminder that brilliance doesn't die just because the world temporarily fails to recognize it. It waits. And eventually, if you're brave enough and stubborn enough and lucky enough, it finds its moment to shine. Evan Brooks had found his moment, and he was just getting started. 3 years moved like water through different vessels, sometimes rushing with the chaos of expansion and discovery, sometimes pooling in quiet moments of reflection. The Innovation Center grew from Evan's unlikely dream into a thriving institution that redrew the map of automotive safety research. What had begun with a small team of overlooked engineers had expanded to 73 employees representing 16 countries and dozens of specializations, all united by the conviction that human life deserved protection through excellence in design. Evan stood now in the observation deck overlooking the main testing facility, watching a crash simulation unfold in real time on the monitors below. His fifth-generation integrated safety architecture was being evaluated in a reconstructed highway accident scenario, the exact conditions that had killed Sarah, recreated down to the pothole depth and vehicle speed. The test vehicle, equipped with his latest systems, approached the irregularity at 67 miles per hour. James Chen stood beside him, tablet in hand, monitoring data streams. Predictive suspension engaging in 3, 2, 1. The vehicle's suspension adjusted instantaneously, the shock absorbers responding to road conditions half a second before the wheels encountered them. The car maintained perfect stability through the maneuver, safety systems communicating seamlessly, no loss of control, no need for emergency intervention. "Clean pass," James announced, pulling up performance metrics. "Better than simulation projected. The neural processing unit is learning faster than we anticipated. It's identifying road irregularities with 98.3% accuracy now." "And the redundant airbag deployment system?" Evan asked, though he could see the answer in the data scrolling across screens. "Didn't need to activate, which is exactly the point. The suspension prevented the loss of control that would have required airbag deployment." James looked at Evan with something approaching reverence. "This system would have saved your wife, Evan, no question." The words landed like a benediction and a wound simultaneously. Yes, Sarah would have survived in a vehicle equipped with these systems, but she wasn't alive to benefit from them, would never meet the thousands of families who would survive because of innovations born from her death. "It'll save someone else's wife," Evan said quietly. "That has to be enough." His phone vibrated with a message from Dr. Santori. "NHTSA final certification came through. Your Gen 5 architecture approved for immediate implementation. BMW and Toyota both confirmed production integration starting Q3. Evan, by this time next year, your systems will be in 8 million new vehicles. We did it." 8 million vehicles. Evan tried to comprehend the scale. 8 million families driving safer cars. 8 million sets of children secured by better protection systems. 8 million chances for people to arrive home instead of becoming statistics. The math was almost too large to feel, too abstract to connect to the very personal grief that had sparked everything. "Dad?" Mira's voice carried from the facility entrance. She was 15 now, taller and more poised than the 12-year-old who'd posted his designs online with desperate hope. She wore a visitor badge and carried a folder marked with MIT's logo. "Your 3 o'clock is here." Evan glanced at his schedule. Leonard Voss, Annual Partnership Review. Over the past 3 years, Voss Technologies had become one of the Innovation Center's most reliable funding partners, contributing not just money, but also manufacturing expertise and distribution channels. The relationship had evolved from hostile to pragmatic to something resembling genuine mutual respect, though Evan suspected they'd never be friends. "Conference room?" Evan asked. "Already set up. And Dad?" The MIT admissions decision came. She held up the folder, her expression carefully neutral. Evan's heart seized. Mira had applied early decision to MIT's dual program in mechanical engineering and biomedical engineering. Sarah's dream for her daughter, updated for Mira's evolved interests. The application had been stellar, her grades perfect, her recommendations glowing. But still, MIT accepted only 3% of applicants, and the weight of rejection could crush even the most resilient teenager. "Open it," he said gently. "What if—" "Open it, Butterfly. Whatever it says, we'll handle it together." She took a breath, tore open the envelope with fingers that trembled slightly, and pulled out a single page. Her eyes scanned the first lines, and Evan watched her face transform. Shock, giving way to disbelief, giving way to incandescent joy. "I got in," she whispered. "Full scholarship. They want me for the biomedical engineering program." She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, I got into MIT." Evan crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, pulling her into a hug that lifted her off her feet despite her height. "Of course you did. You're brilliant. You've always been brilliant." "Mom wanted this," Mira said against his shoulder. She always talked about MIT, about how I could change the world there. You've already changed the world, Butterfly. MIT is just the next chapter. They stood there in the observation deck, holding each other while James tactfully studied his tablet, and the testing crew below pretended not to notice. 3 years of rebuilding, of pursuing impossible dreams, of transforming tragedy into purpose. And now Mira would carry that forward, would develop innovations that saved lives in ways Evan couldn't even imagine yet. "Mr. Voss is waiting," Mira finally said, pulling back and wiping her eyes. "We should probably not keep him too long." Leonard Voss rose when Evan entered the conference room, extending his hand with an ease that would have seemed impossible 3 years ago. He'd aged visibly, more gray in his hair, lines around his eyes that suggested recent stress. But he carried himself with less arrogance than before, more humility earned through consequences. "Evan, good to see you." They shook, and Voss turned to Mira. "And the MIT scholar herself. Congratulations. I heard through the grapevine your acceptance was coming. Remarkable achievement." "Thank you," Mira said, still glowing. "Though I'm curious how you heard before I did. I sit on MIT's Engineering Advisory Board. Your application came through review with unanimous enthusiasm. Several professors specifically noted that you've been co-authoring papers with your father since age 13. That's not common." "She's earned every authorship credit," Evan said, settling into a chair. "Her insights into user-centered design have been invaluable. Most engineers design for theoretical users. Mira designs for actual humans." Voss opened his laptop, pulling up a presentation. "Speaking of which, I wanted to discuss expanding our partnership. Voss Technologies is developing a new line of commercial vehicles, delivery trucks, fleet vehicles, public transportation. We'd like to integrate your Gen 5 architecture across the entire line, but more importantly, we want to fund research into systems specifically designed for commercial applications. Different use cases, different risk profiles than consumer vehicles." "What's the budget you're proposing?" Evan asked, though money had long since stopped being his primary concern. The Innovation Center was self-sustaining now, licensing revenue from his patents funding operations with enough surplus to endow research grants for promising young engineers. 15 million over 3 years, with performance bonuses if we hit implementation milestones. Voss advanced his presentation, showing detailed timelines and technical specifications. "But I also wanted to propose something more personal. A scholarship fund in Sarah's name, the Sarah Brooks Memorial Scholarship for Safety Innovation. Full ride for 5 students annually, specifically targeting candidates from non-traditional backgrounds who've faced significant adversity." Evan felt his throat tighten. "Why?" "Because 3 years ago, I was the kind of person who measured worth by credentials and judged competence by appearance. I missed the most important engineering innovation of the decade because I couldn't see past a dusty garage and oil-stained coveralls." Voss closed his laptop, meeting Evan's eyes directly. "I've spent 3 years trying to atone for that blindness. The scholarship is part of that atonement. I can't undo the cruelty I showed you and Mira that day, but I can help ensure other brilliant people don't face the same dismissal." Mira leaned forward. "How much per scholarship?" "Full tuition, room, board, and a research stipend. Whatever it takes to ensure financial barriers don't prevent talented people from developing innovations that save lives." "That's going to cost you millions," Evan observed. "I have millions. What I don't have is the satisfaction of knowing my wealth created something meaningful." Voss smiled slightly. "Turns out, watching your company's stock price rise isn't nearly as fulfilling as watching engineers you've supported present groundbreaking research." "Who knew?" Despite himself, Evan laughed. "All right, let's do it. The scholarship fund and the commercial vehicle partnership. But I have one condition." "Name it." "You personally mentor one scholarship recipient each year. Not just write checks. Actually invest time, share your business expertise, help them navigate the industry. If you're serious about atonement, prove it with effort, not just money." Voss extended his hand. "Deal. Though I should warn you, I'm not naturally gifted at mentorship. I'm told I can be somewhat intimidating." "You'll learn," Mira said cheerfully. "Dad was terrible at public speaking 3 years ago, and now he presents to thousands of people without breaking a sweat. Growth is possible for everyone." After Voss left, Evan sat in the conference room reviewing the partnership documents. But his mind kept drifting to larger questions. The Innovation Center was thriving, His systems were being implemented globally. Mira was headed to MIT. Every tangible measure suggested complete success. So why did he sometimes wake at 3 a.m. feeling like something essential was still missing? Dr. Santori had been visiting more frequently over the past 6 months, ostensibly to oversee Ferrari's ongoing involvement, but increasingly for reasons that seemed more personal than professional. She'd started staying for dinners, asking about Mira's college preparations, sharing stories about her own daughter who was completing a graduate program in physics at Cambridge. The conversations had evolved from purely technical to genuinely intimate, and Evan found himself looking forward to her visits with an anticipation that had nothing to do with business. She arrived that evening for what was scheduled as a quarterly review, but felt more like a social visit. Evan had cooked, nothing fancy, just pasta and salad, but prepared with care in the small house he'd bought near the Innovation Center, a modest upgrade from the apartment above the garage. Mira joined them for dinner before disappearing to her room, claiming homework, but more likely giving them privacy with teenage subtlety. She got into MIT, Evan said, pouring wine. Full scholarship, biomedical engineering program. I know, I wrote one of her recommendation letters, remember? Camilla, she'd asked him to use her first name months ago, though he still defaulted to Dr. Santori in professional settings, smiled over her glass. She's extraordinary, Evan, just like her father. She's better than me. Smarter, braver, more confident at 15 than I was at 30. She had an excellent teacher. Camilla set down her wine, her expression turning serious. But she's also had to grow up watching her father sacrifice everything for work that mattered. That shapes a person, gives them perspective most teenagers never develop. You think I've sacrificed too much? I think you've been so focused on honoring Sarah's memory that you've forgotten you're allowed to build a future too. She reached across the table, her hand covering his. It's been 3 years, Evan. The Innovation Center is established. Your work is changing the industry. Mira is thriving. At some point, you need to ask yourself what you want beyond professional success. Her hand on his felt electric, significant, like a door opening onto possibilities he'd deliberately kept closed. Since Sarah's death, romance had seemed like a betrayal, a replacement rather than a continuation. But Camilla wasn't trying to replace anyone. She was offering something different, partnership with someone who understood his work, respected his grief, and saw him clearly without either pedestal or pity. I don't know if I'm ready, he admitted. I'm not asking for ready. I'm asking if you're willing to consider that maybe, eventually, there could be space in your life for something other than work and parenting. No pressure, no timeline, just possibility. Evan thought about Sarah, about what she would say if she could see him now. She'd been pragmatic about death, had once told him after a friend's cancer diagnosis that if anything happened to her, she wanted him to find happiness again. Life's too short for performative grief, she'd said. If I die young, promise me you'll live fully. Fall in love again. Give Mira a family beyond just you. Don't turn my death into an excuse to stop living. At the time, the conversation had felt abstract, impossible to imagine. Now, with Camilla's hand warm on his, her eyes patient and kind, he realized that honoring Sarah's memory didn't require remaining frozen in grief. Maybe the truest way to honor her was to prove that love wasn't finite, that one profound connection didn't preclude others, that hearts could expand rather than just replace. Possibility, he said slowly. I think I can work with possibility. Her smile was like sunrise, gradual, inevitable, illuminating. Good. Because I've been waiting for you to notice I've been visiting for reasons beyond Ferrari's quarterly reviews. I noticed. I've just been terrified of what noticing might mean. It means you're human, Evan. Allowed to grieve and heal, to honor the past while building a future. It means you're more than the tragedy that defined you for 3 years. She squeezed his hand gently. Though I should mention, I move quite slowly in relationships. I'm 57 years old and rather set in my ways. We'd be looking at a very long, very gradual progression toward anything serious. I've got time, Evan said, and meant it. The months that followed brought changes both gradual and seismic. Mira finished high school with honors, spent the summer interning at the Innovation Center before leaving for MIT in late August. Evan drove her to Cambridge, helped set up her dorm room, and cried unabashedly when they said goodbye in the parking lot. You'll be fine, Mira assured him, though her own eyes were wet. The center practically runs itself now. You've got Camilla visiting every month, and I'll be home for Thanksgiving. This isn't goodbye, Dad. It's just the next chapter. I know, but you've been my anchor for 3 years. I'm not sure who I am without you nearby. You're Evan Brooks, the engineer who changed automotive safety forever. You're the man who turned tragedy into purpose. You're someone who deserves happiness, Dad. Please let yourself find it. He watched her disappear into her dormitory, already meeting other students, already beginning the transformation from his daughter into her own person. The drive back to California felt longer than the drive out, and when Evan finally reached Riverside, the house felt too quiet, too empty. But the Innovation Center was alive with activity. James had recruited a brilliant young engineer from South Korea who'd developed promising work on predictive collision algorithms. Dr. Nguyen was presenting at a safety conference in Berlin. The second cohort of Sarah Brooks Memorial Scholars had arrived. 5 remarkable young people from backgrounds ranging from inner-city Detroit to rural Appalachia. All brilliant, all overlooked by traditional recruitment. Evan threw himself into mentorship, spending hours with the scholars, learning their stories, helping them navigate the intimidating world of professional engineering. One scholar, a 22-year-old woman named Jasmine from Atlanta, had survived 3 car accidents before age 16, each one preventable with better safety systems. Her determination to ensure others didn't face similar trauma reminded Evan of himself 3 years ago, and he found himself sharing his own story with more openness than he'd managed before. You really called out Quantum Motors at that Detroit summit? Jasmine asked during one late-night conversation in the lab. I did. Scared the hell out of me, but it needed to be said. Do you regret it? The whistleblowing, walking away from your career, all of it? Evan considered the question carefully. I regret that Sarah had to die for me to realize how broken the system was. But I don't regret exposing that brokenness or spending 3 years fixing it. Some things are worth sacrificing career advancement for. Like integrity? Like knowing you did everything possible to prevent other families from experiencing what yours did. Jasmine nodded, something settling in her expression. I want to do that. Not just design safety systems, but actually change how the industry thinks about moral responsibility. Then that's what we'll help you do. That's why this center exists, to support engineers who prioritize human welfare over quarterly profits. The partnership with Quantum Motors had evolved into something surprisingly productive. True to their promise, they'd implemented comprehensive whistleblower protections and established an independent safety review board with authority to mandate recalls without executive interference. Several engineers had come forward with previously suppressed safety concerns, resulting in 3 major recalls and 0 executive pushback. The culture wasn't perfect. Decades of profit-driven thinking didn't transform overnight, but genuine change was evident. In early December, as the first snow fell on Riverside in a rare weather event, Evan received a call from Quantum's CEO. Mr. Brooks, this is Diane Foster. We've never met formally, but I took over Quantum Motors 18 months ago following the previous leadership's forced resignation. I'm aware, Evan said carefully. He'd followed Quantum's upheaval with satisfaction. Several executives who'd known about the airbag defect had been removed, and Foster's appointment had been praised by safety advocates. I'm calling because Quantum's board has authorized me to make a formal offer. We'd like to establish a permanent memorial to your wife at our corporate headquarters, the Sarah Brooks Safety Innovation Wing. It would house a museum documenting automotive safety evolution, a research center for early career engineers, and a permanent reminder of why safety can never be compromised for profit. Evan sat down slowly. Why? Because we owe your family an unpayable debt. Because Sarah's death exposed failures that could have killed thousands more if you hadn't forced accountability. Because the industry needs constant reminding that every design decision affects real humans with names and families and futures. Foster paused. And because you've proven that acknowledging failure honestly is less damaging than hiding it. You could have destroyed our company, Mr. Brooks. Instead, you've helped us become better. We'd like to honor that and honor Sarah's memory in a permanent way. I need to think about it, Evan said, though he already knew his answer. Sarah would have loved the idea of her name associated with systemic change, of her death forcing an entire company to reckon with its moral failures and emerge better. Of course, take your time. And Mr. Brooks, thank you for refusing to let us hide from what we'd done, for insisting we face it and fix it. That kind of integrity is rare, and the industry is better for it. That evening, Evan stood in the old garage for the first time in months. He'd kept it exactly as it was, a monument to where everything began, preserved like a museum of his darkest and most transformative years. His old workbench still held tools, Mira's childhood drawings still decorated the walls, the same water-stained ceiling tiles overhead. He pulled out Sarah's photograph from the toolbox where he still kept it, studying her laughing face. "Quantum wants to build a memorial wing in your name," he told her softly. "The kind of institutional change you always believed in. The kind that forces people to remember that their decisions affect real lives." The photo didn't answer, but Evan felt peace settle over him. Not the absence of grief, but its integration into something larger. Sarah would always be gone, that hollow space in his chest permanent. But now it coexisted with purpose, love, legacy, future. The grief hadn't disappeared. It had transformed into the foundation for everything he'd built. His phone rang. Camilla, calling from Milan where Ferrari was hosting a year-end gala. "How's Riverside?" she asked, her voice warm across the distance. "Quiet. Snowing, which is bizarre for California. How's Milan?" "Ostentatious and exhausting. I keep making excuses to leave the gala early and work on next year's research budget. Which reminds me, Ferrari's board has approved expanding our funding to the Innovation Center, $20 million annually for the next 5 years, with provisions for performance bonuses." "Camilla, that's incredible." "It's deserved. Your work is saving lives, Evan. Real, quantifiable, documented lives. We've started collecting stories, people who survived accidents that would have been fatal without your systems. There are over 300 documented cases already, and those are just the ones we know about. 300 people. 300 families still intact because of innovations he'd developed in a dusty garage while grieving. The number was staggering, insufficient, miraculous. "I wish Sarah could know," he said quietly. "I think she does. However that works. Energy, memory, legacy. I think she knows what you built from her death. And I think she's proud of you." "I hope so." "Evan?" Camilla's voice softened. "I've been thinking. My position at Ferrari is flexible enough that I could relocate. If you wanted. If we'd reached that point where having an ocean between us feels impractical." His heart seized with hope and terror in equal measure. "You'd move to California?" "I'd move to Riverside specifically. To be closer to the work, to the center, to you, and eventually to Mira when she's home from MIT. I'm not suggesting we rush into anything, but I am suggesting we stop pretending this is just a professional relationship with occasional personal elements. It's the reverse, Evan, and I'm ready to acknowledge that openly if you are." Evan looked at Sarah's photograph, at her frozen smile, her captured joy from a birthday party 7 years gone. She'd made him promise to live fully, to not use her death as an excuse for stagnation. This was living fully, allowing himself to love again without erasing or replacing what he'd had before. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I'm ready for that." "Good. Then expect me in Riverside by February. I'll find a place near the center, and we'll figure out what this looks like together. Slowly, carefully, but together." After they hung up, Evan sat in the quiet garage holding Sarah's photograph, feeling the full weight and wonder of transformation. 3 years ago, he'd been a broken man in a dying garage, mocked and dismissed, buried in grief so profound he could barely function. Now he directed an innovation center changing global safety standards, mentored scholars developing the next generation of life-saving systems, and was opening his heart to love again with someone who understood both his work and his wounds. Dreams didn't die, he realized. They waited. They evolved. They transformed into forms you couldn't have anticipated but somehow recognized as exactly what you needed. He carefully returned Sarah's photo to the toolbox, turned off the garage lights one final time, and walked across the parking lot to the Innovation Center's gleaming entrance. Tomorrow, his team would continue developing systems that protected millions. Quantum would break ground on Sarah's memorial wing. Camilla would start planning her relocation. Mira would return for winter break with stories about MIT and dreams about medical devices that would save lives in ways automotive engineering couldn't touch. The work would continue, the way all meaningful work continues, built brick by brick, innovation by innovation, life saved by life saved. Evan Brooks had started this journey in humiliation and grief, had been called a nobody mechanic with fantasy drawings. He was ending it as someone who'd proven that brilliance could emerge from anywhere, that tragedy could fuel transformation, that one person's refusal to accept preventable death as inevitable could change an entire industry. Standing in the lobby of the center bearing his name, surrounded by equipment and expertise that made the impossible suddenly achievable, Evan finally allowed himself to feel what he'd been afraid to feel for 3 years. Not just pride in what he'd built, but genuine excitement for what came next. The future stretched before him, no longer dark with grief but bright with possibility. And for the first time since Sarah's death, he was ready to step into it without guilt or hesitation. He'd survived the worst thing that could happen to a person. He'd transformed that survival into purpose. He'd proven that love wasn't finite, that hearts could expand, that life after tragedy could be meaningful and full and even joyful. And somewhere, in whatever way the universe kept accounts, Evan believed Sarah knew, believed she saw the innovation center, the lives saved, the daughter thriving at MIT, the man he'd become by refusing to let grief win completely, believed she approved of Camilla, of his gradual healing, of his willingness to find happiness again. Dreams don't die, Evan thought, looking at the memorial plaque near the entrance that read, "In memory of Sarah Brooks, whose loss sparked innovation that protects millions." They wait for courage to resurrect them, for stubbornness to sustain them, for love to transform them into something even more beautiful than the original vision. He'd waited. He'd been stubborn. He'd loved fiercely enough to turn tragedy into legacy. And now, finally, he was ready to live the future his work had earned, not as penance for surviving when Sarah didn't, but as celebration of everything she'd taught him about resilience, about purpose, about the fierce determination required to turn broken things into something that could fly. The caterpillar's dissolution was complete. The butterfly had emerged, and the sky waited, vast and impossible and full of light.